The limitations with a lot of the studies that people cite as being gospel are very limited. My EMG study said blah, blah, blah.
How dare he criticize science? So Coach Butler, it is time for us to duke it out, man. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding, guys. Science is absolutely overrated when it comes to strength and hypertrophy and even performance training. What's up, guys? Enkiri here, and today we're going to review and respond to a recent video by Bald Omni-Man titled 4 Stupid Ways to Get Fucking Jacked. Science is overrated, and whew, I knew I wanted to make a response to this video the second that I saw the title, because I touched on this concept several years ago in the wake of the athlete X is not a strength coach debate, in part because of that silly little tagline of his, putting the science back into strength. And in response to that, I made a snarkily titled video that I called Putting the Art Back into Strength Training, where I touched on some of these exact same concepts, the overemphasis of scientific evidence when it comes to an endeavor that thrives more so on vast arrays of personal experience, right? It's an in vogue thing these days, and it's not just Athlete X who does it. There are hordes of guys out there using science as a way to make themselves appear authoritative and stand out in the fitness realm, right? They have a financial incentive to do this, to promote this idea. But ultimately, many of these people are almost doing more of a disservice to the community than they are doing a service, because they give people the impression, people who don't know any better, that there's some sort of exactitude going on here, right? Some sort of exact means and measures by which we can improve things. And the reality is, there isn't. The fact of the matter is, there are far, far too many variables to control for, and too much variance from individual to individual to ever really be able to glean all that much useful information from a 16-week training study. So basically, anytime somebody who knows what they're talking about makes this assertion like Paris is doing here, I get really excited, and that's why I clicked on that Bald Omni-Man video. And so today I kind of want to just jump into some of the meat of his video and give you guys some of my direct thoughts in response to some of his thoughts. So let's get to it.
And just real quick, guys, if you're in the market for a top-notch meal prep company, then be sure to check out FlexPro meals and use code Enkiri Elite for 20% off your order. The link is in the description. The food's legit. It usually arrives in just a couple days. They have a bunch of different high-protein meal options, and it's a really easy and convenient way to help keep your diet and your macros on track. And now, back to your regularly scheduled program.
I think that bro splits, the way that they're presented, are stupid for most people. But in terms of their spirit and the meaning and the purpose behind it, to give each body part their own day and their own emphasis, that's a very smart idea. It doesn't have to be taken to the extent where you have an arm day, chest day, leg day, so on. But if you follow something like an upper lower, you can have something like a back day where, shit, dude, if you have like a lagging upper back or lagging lats or whatever the case may be, have a dedicated back day.
Now, I like the way he breaks it down here. So instead of going full bro, right, and breaking your entire body up into every individual body part, basically what I'm hearing is stick with a more comprehensive split, something like an upper lower, maybe even a push-pull legs, something to that effect, and then add in an extra session or two that's dedicated to a specific weak point. So the way that I envision something like that is doing it kind of in spurts. So let's say that your chest and your quads are what you've decided are your 2 weak points, right? So maybe you would spend 4 to 6 weeks, something like that, doing 1 or 2 extra mini training sessions in each microcycle, where you focus in those mini sessions specifically on the chest. You would then switch things up, and you'd spend the next 4 to 6 weeks doing those additional mini sessions, but now you'd focus on the quads instead. And then after that, you could go back to hitting the chest again, right? So you could kind of rotate through that And you could repeat that process until you were satisfied with the gains. But by doing those small rotating cycles of higher volume training for a specific body part, you would get those initial gains, the initial gains that come on by adding extra volume into the mix, and then you would stop that extra work before you become fully acclimated to it, before the plateau sets in. And then with that time off, you would once again allow the body to become resensitized to that training again. The body would de-train back down to a lower workload. It would become acclimated to a lower level of volume again. So then, once you add the extra volume back in, again, you'll be ready to make another round of gains. Now, personally, I am more exercise-oriented rather than body part-oriented, so I have used this exact sort of approach to work on specific lifts in the past. For example, last time I was focusing on my push press, I had 2 normal upper body training sessions, pretty typical for me. One of those sessions was focused around the push press, along with several other upper body exercises in that same training session. The other session was just focused on other miscellaneous upper body movements. I don't remember the exact specifics, right? But then later on in the training week, I threw in a third mini upper body session. And in that mini session, literally the only exercise I did that day was the push press. Now that session only took like 30 minutes to do, right? It was very short. And that little mini session allowed me to get in more total training volume on the specific lift that I wanted to work. In this case, the push press. And you could do this same exact thing, this same exact method for any exercise or any body part, really, kind of just depending on what your goals are.
I have days where I do extra arm work. You could have days where, okay, this is just an accessory day. I'm going to do upright rows, calves, abs, whatever. Having that separate day, which focuses in on a weak point, is a very smart idea. You can take that wisdom away from bro splits.
I also like the dedicated accessory day idea. I think that every advanced lifter comes to this conclusion probably at some point or another, that if there are specific smaller tasks that they want to prioritize, they're better off adding those things together and then kind of working on them on their own separate day as sort of an addendum to the larger training program, which is still what really takes priority. And so splitting it up like that allows you to work on those things while you're still fresh in a new day, right? And actually give them meaningful amounts of energy to improve upon them. And by having them split up, it does so without detracting from that other, perhaps more important work. So that's a good idea there too.
I learned that pre-exhausting muscles is very, very valid for making certain exercises work better and to just transform them completely. Pre-exhaustion is something that gets shit on a lot as like some sort of bro science. It's stupid. You can't get as good performance if you pre-exhaust. It doesn't do anything. My EMG study said blah, blah, blah. Look, sometimes you gotta ditch the book smarts and listen to your body. The limitations with a lot of the studies that people cite as being gospel are very limited, and just the deep dive that we're able to take in exercise science in a clinical aspect is very limited. But you have to be able to interpret these studies and see if they actually apply to you or not. All that bullshit pertaining to pre-exhaustion clearly didn't pertain to me. Great hypertrophy stimulus.
I'm inclined to agree with pretty much the entire sentiment here. And honestly, it makes sense. Now, I'm not a hypertrophy guru or anything like that, but it would stand to reason that if you want a particular muscle to grow, that you need to stress that muscle more than the other prime movers that it works in conjunction with. And this can be a difficult thing to achieve when you have a natural predisposition for a certain muscle to dominate over in a lot of different similar movement patterns, while the other prime movers that partake in that movement pattern kind of sit back and let that other muscle dominate, right? And so that is an issue that only becomes reinforced over time as well. That is, if my shoulders are stronger than my chest, right, then my shoulders are going to start to take over different exercises and receive more stimulation than my chest from probably most of my pressing movements. You add that up, it compounds over time. So now the shoulders become even bigger and stronger and bigger and stronger. They start to dominate more and more and more, right? Which only leaves my chest lagging even further and further behind as time goes on. So if your goal is hypertrophy and then balance or aesthetics, however you deem that within that hypertrophy framework, then and you want to hypertrophy a specific muscle, then I see absolutely no reason why this method wouldn't work as a good means of doing so. Hypertrophy is all about mechanical tension and stimulating the muscle that you want to grow. So by isolating that muscle beforehand and fatiguing it a bit, you ensure that it will be adequately stimulated over the course of the training session, or at least now equally stimulated as the muscles that usually dominate over top of it. Now, I don't think this is ideal from a strength perspective because you likely will be reducing total force production potential by deliberately making a muscle tired before training in earnest. So you're probably not really going to hear stories of strength athletes or anybody like that using this particular tool. However, even then, I think it could still potentially have a place, even if strength is your goal and not aesthetics. And I will explain that just now. So for example, let's say, again, my chest is a weak point, right? And I think that a lack of muscular size in my chest is holding back my total force production potential, right? And therefore holding back my bench press. So I want my chest to be bigger so that my total potential for pressing force production will become larger, so that my ceiling for force production in the pressing pattern will become higher. But no matter what I do, I can't get my chest to grow. My triceps will grow, my shoulders will grow, but my chest won't grow. So let's say in this case, I want to use the pre-exhaust method. So I'm still going to, but I want to focus on benching, becoming a better bencher. In this case, I'm still going to train my bench press hard and heavy in its own right, on its own day, probably at least 2 times per week, just to make sure that I'm still training the nervous system sufficiently and still training that motor pattern for technical gains and technical prowess as well. However, in this case, I would consider adding in a 3rd session, a hypertrophy-oriented session, where I use the pre-exhaust technique for the chest prior to hitting some other compound upper body pressing movements, right? So the goal with this session would be to stimulate hypertrophy primarily in the chest muscles and over time bring them up to snuff. And then that extra muscle is going to create a higher total force production potential during pressing movement patterns, during the bench press pattern. So pre-exhaust, I think it could work. And I guess we're all just slowly turning into bros.
Something else that really worked well is the 8 or 9 day split. You don't have to structure your training within 7 days. You can structure it within 9 days or 8 or 10. More rest days means more quality work during each of these sessions. It means more recovery, so you get a better hypertrophy from that since you're resting more. And overall, dude, it just frees up your schedule to be able to do stuff other than go to the gym.
Now, this is a concept that I'm less of a fan of in terms of my own personal training split. The main reason for this is that I'm somewhat OCD, right? And I want everything lined up. I want everything in its place. I want it to be lined up nice and neat and revolving around that neat cyclical pattern of a 7-day week. It's just something that makes my brain happy. So that's what I do for myself. That said, there's obviously utility to this concept, and I do actually program this way. I program outside of a 7-day microcycle, and I'll bump the training microcycle up to 8, sometimes 9, or even 10 days, right? For some of my clients, depending on what their schedule is, what their lifestyle is, and how they're kind of hoping to have things be set up for themselves. So I'm amenable to the idea where it's applicable. However, what's more important here to me is less the idea of stretching out the microcycle, the training microcycle, and making it longer, or stretching it out over the course of more days, and more so the notion here that he's getting at of rest being so paramount. The longer and longer that I do this, the more I come to the realization that recovering well is really the absolute king of everything anyway. And then you kind of build around that concept rather than the other way around. So rather than viewing recovery as secondary to training, you view training as secondary to recovery, right? So here you start off with, okay, here is where I'm going to let my body recover. And then around that, now I'm going to allocate these slots to hit the gym hard. Then I'm going to sit back, I'm going to rest up, and then I'm going to come out and I'm going to do it again a few days later. And that potentially less frequent training, it actually makes the itch a lot stronger. So you're more willing to push yourself hard when you do hit the gym. And then with that, since you're also better physically recovered, you also get more out of it as well. And I've experienced this multiple times in recent history, right? I've talked about deloads a couple months ago. I did a response to natural hypertrophy, where I talked about how important deloading is. When I was doing the 20 rep squat program a year or 2 years ago, however long ago that was, it seemed like the less I squatted, the better I got at 20 rep squats. It got to a point where I was doing one set of squats once every like 10 or 14 days. And that was how I was making the best progress on that program.
Mike Mentzer. People like to meme on heavy duty training and high intensity training and, say, Mike Mentzer is full of shit because he came up with high intensity training after he'd always done volume training. But there's something that he would purport when talking about high intensity training that is very true. Rest is important, and also intensity. You don't have to take it to the extent where you're just doing one hard set, but having a gauge and a true barometer for what a really hard set is and what a 2 failure set is and beyond failure set is allows you to auto-regulate and do less than that accurately. In other words, use RPE. Also, it puts a premium on rest. You destroy yourself in the gym, right? But you take just as much, if not longer, to recover from that so that you can repeat that performance and do a little bit better.
Hey man, I'm all for this idea. I have the exact type of personality that is drawn to the sorts of things that Mentzer used to talk about with HIIT style, high intensity training, right? Busting your ass so hard that you can only do it one time and then going home and resting for days on end. You're either on or you're off, right? There's no middle ground there. You're on or you're off. It's all or it's nothing. That's kind of how my personality is. So I'm drawn to these types of concepts and ideas in general. And I think that that does show itself in the training styles that I've gravitated towards and even created myself over the years. For example, I hate list cardio, but I will happily do rounds of high intensity conditioning work all day long. I'm either on or I'm off. I hate being in the middle. I love working my way up to heavy top sets in the gym and then doing back off work with lighter weights, either on the same exercise or even switching to a different movement afterward, different but similar movement to hit the same muscles, right? So that kind of idea, it allows you to peak your focus for a brief period of time where you're really on for that main event, right? Give it your all where it really counts, and then dial it back slightly when it's a little bit less important. And that kind of gives you the best of both worlds, in my opinion. You get some of the benefits of HIIT, that high intensity, as well as some of the benefits of accruing extra volume. I even think that true HIIT training, as detailed by Mike Mentzer, could work very well for certain trainees, depending on their training experience and their goals at that particular moment in time. So let's say you have a guy who's been around the block, he's experienced, he has a good base of both strength and muscle. And now he is in a time crunch. He doesn't have very much time to train. We'll say maybe 3, maybe even just 2 hours per week that he could devote to training. Take a guy like this, who's already developed, he's already well developed, he doesn't have much time to focus on the endeavor at this moment. I think a guy like that could run a true HIIT protocol and not only maintain what he has, but also potentially make pretty good progress for a decent chunk of time, assuming that sufficient effort is able to be given on each of these ultra important sets. Now, this progress spurt wouldn't last all that long in the grand scheme of things because the total volume is going to be so low, the total training volume is going to be so low, that the body's going to acclimate to that stressor pretty quickly because you can only work so hard, right? At some point, your effort level is capped. So you can't keep increasing the effort level. You're already giving 100%. So if you're only doing so much work, you're not tinkering with other variables, eventually your progress is going to stagnate. That's just the way the world works. But I do think that this type of thing could be enough of a kick in the ass to carry you through periods of time where you don't really have much time to devote to your training and still allow you to make pretty damn good progress during those time periods. It might just be enough of a shift in the norm, a shift from the norm to create a jump start that you wouldn't otherwise get. It's not necessarily going to be optimal, especially not for long stretches, but it is good enough to get the job done when the circumstances call for it. Never let perfect become the enemy of good. That is a message that I've tried to convey on this channel in recent years. Striving for perfection in this game, all it often does is create paralysis by analysis, whereas striving for good enough and then just sprinkling in a little bit of that X factor, the X factor, which is effort, is really what actually creates beasts in the long run. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to talk about today. Guys, Coach Paris, cool video, bro. Some cogent points there and good info for all you guys to absorb and think about. Now, if you guys enjoy these types of videos or you simply find them informative, please remember to hit the like button and leave me some love in the comments down below before you go. The engagement is really helpful for my channel, guys. If you find the info here helpful and you just want to throw some support my way, then be sure to check out EnkiriEliteFitness.com. I offer custom training programs, comprehensive online coaching, as well as training templates. Now, I have sold probably a few thousand of those. I know I've been harping on this lately, but I've sold probably a few thousand of those training templates over the last few years since I released them. And the gains that people have reported back to me have been freaking awesome, man. Like I've been saying, they're more than just generic training programs, guys. They're basically reusable teaching manuals that give you guys all the gains while teaching you how to program for yourself along the way. I have always strived to live by the mantra of don't just give a man a fish, but teach him how to fish as well. So that is really what my goals were when I created those templates. So be sure to grab one of those if you want to join the hype. That's all I got for today, guys. Keep training hard. I'll catch you guys next time.